Hi everyone, this is Erica, Tried and True Delaware Warmachine. Before we get started with tonight's AkersMachine, we just wanted to let everybody know some exciting news. Tickets for Nova Open are live. So if you head over to the Nova Open website on tabletop events, go ahead and head down to the Warmachine section and you can take a look and see all the events that we'll be running all weekend long. Again, tickets went up 7 p.m. Eastern, March 1st. We hope to see you in DC, 28 August through 1 September. And now to AkersMachine.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's great. I mean, I'm super excited for Nova. I'm definitely looking at getting my tickets here relatively probably later on this night. So that's awesome. So yeah, we're just basically continuing some conversations we left off with the last episode. I know we had a bunch of people submit questions, so that's awesome. Something that we're going to try out a little differently tonight. Instead of obviously me just sitting up here yammering for 20, 30 minutes about obviously the state of the game and all of that, I would rather it be kind of a more of an open forum between obviously, you guys and myself and try to, brain trust through a lot of the problems and issues that, people are kind of having with, Steamroller 24, evaluating models, just trying to work through, because I would say, because, what works for me may not work for everybody, but you guys might have some more insight, and being able to help, more minds may offer more insight on some things. So, if you guys are cool with that, I will stop me at any point, and if you want to chime in, feel free to do so, and we'll go from there. Okay. So Erica, if you want to go, through some of the topics we've got for tonight, we can go from there.
Sure thing. So big focus on tonight is paper versus table and model performance. So we do have a couple questions from our community. Thank you everybody who submitted their questions. So our first one comes from Tyrants on the Field. Shout out, check out his YouTube channel. So for AkersMachine, one thing you've touched on before, but I'd like it discussed in this better on paper context, is that it's generally better to take a good model and make it great with support than an okay model and make it good with support. So the questions to this are, what if your army has a few great models? Do you work with a meh to good? Or is there an alternative you would propose? And to that end, what are hallmarks of a good model, and does that change with the Steamroller environment?
Okay. So in general, if you're, working with a underpowered faction, I would say, Menoth or even some of the legacy armies, I mean, they aren't as proficient as some of the more Mark IV stuff. And if you are working with, a few great, a few good selections and not, the top tier stuff, I typically would look more into like the inner model synergies and not just the overall power level of a model. So going with, making, good models better with like strong support, as long as you're not putting too much support into your list to kind of, if you're not doing it, having enough do work models. So we kind of, addressed a little bit, obviously, what a do work model is in the last episode. And if you, want a refresher on that, by all means, go back and listen to that one. But so you want to just look at, giving your models the best chance to succeed, right? So putting in good models, giving them good support, and help giving them a more well-rounded feel. So if your model hits really hard but it's not very fast, you're looking at basically trying to extend threat ranges, because especially in this steamroll packet and these scenarios, more so than even in Mark III, speed is everything. Speed, maneuverability, and having your models being self-sufficient, where they don't need any support from your caster to do what they need to do, are aces right now. So anything that's terrain agnostic, whether you have ghostly, whether you have just straight pathfinder, flight, any of those types of abilities are incredibly powerful right now. With the addition of repo and just out of activation movement shenanigans, are hugely powerful in this scenario. So you're looking at those types of models first. I would always try to get those into lists, and then build around that. And then you're looking at, again, your centerpiece model, whatever you want to have your focal point of your list be, whether that be a character warjack, whether that be a battle engine, even your 80 millimeter bases, or even Magnus Invictus, something like that, and then build around that. So making sure that you're getting the most effectiveness out of those models. Like I said, again, if anybody has any anything else they would like to chime in with that works well, what has worked for them in this scenario packet, by all means,
ability to go wide is huge. This is something that any army can do in theory, in that every army has access to infantry and access to enough infantry modules. You have the ability to go wide. The trick is having units that can survive long enough and be active long enough to warrant the point expenditure. But I am finding in this packet that I am reaching for more units than I have been under the previous packets, and being more rewarded for grabbing that extra unit than not. Again, redundancy has always been a hallmark of good tournament list design. I would say SR 2024 is also stressing that probably the most that it's been in a long time. You need an ability to be able to contest and contest repeatedly, at least for two to three rounds, generally, because again, Mark IV armies and legacy armies all hit very hard, and this packet is very much about outlasting at a point and being able to continually contest. And the only way that you're able to do that is by having the bodies to do so. So I find myself reaching for, when in doubt, more units. I don't know if that's something you're also finding, Akers or anybody else.
Yeah, definitely. That is a very good point. That's something I wanted to address too. Is like Tyrants was saying, that because the game is so lethal now, and pretty much everything just kills anything basically that you come in contact with. Playing these high powered obviously models, it's hard to get their points back because you've got to obviously trade into that module to kind of even out that expenditure. But with units, what helps you out there is because everything basically gets to eliminate anything that they come in contact with. What their limitation is the number of attacks they can generate. So by playing wider armies and by playing lists with more bodies, it's much harder for a lot of those high-powered models to generate the amount of attacks to remove a lot of those threats, because they're only be able to get a 2-inch bubble around them. Your units, you're only typically, with good placement, probably only going to be able to hit 3 to 4 models in that unit typically, unless you have some kind of movement, whether it be sidestep, overtake, rules of that nature to dig a little deeper and get more models. So I definitely do agree with you on that. That playing units in this environment is definitely the way to go at this point, just because you have so many points to be contested and points to be scored. and units do that the best via with caches, with objective pieces of terrain, and then obviously with your 40 millimeter bases. So there's a lot of good pieces of terrain that are scored more effectively by units than by anything else.
Okay, so moving on to our next question. This one comes from Llama Drama. Akers, I try to focus on key takeaways from each game, whether it be something I noticed or my opponent points out to me. What are 3 things that has stuck with you that you feel has helped you become an accomplished player?
Okay. That is a very good question. I have not thought about that in a while. So to, I guess, being an accomplished player, like you it's constantly going back and refreshing your rules or reading up on other rules. Like, so like I said, I constantly am going back through even my own models in Orgoth or in Scorn and rereading rules and interactions, and almost weekly I'm doing that just to keep it all fresh in your head, because that one time, that one interaction that is very niche, that comes up maybe once out of every 10 games, that interaction could be the difference of winning or losing that game. So just trying to familiarize yourself with your army as best you can, so you're not missing triggers, because that is obviously the value of your army, the value of your models are those abilities. If you are missing and not using your models to the fullest extent of their ability, then you're going to potentially be getting behind attrition wise, by just either missing extra attacks you could have had, or just being able to maneuver or outmaneuver your opponent by doing that. So that is something I definitely recommend to everybody. Is every so often just constantly go back and just open War Room and just read through models. Look at all your stuff. And if you're familiar with your own models, read through your opponent's army. You may not realize what all of their interactions do right offhand by just reading them in War Room, but you're at least going to have some of that will stick in there. If you play that matchup, you're like, oh yeah, this is speed 6. It has sidestep. You're going to know, just pick up a little bit of that, and that could be just enough to help jog your memory, or even being able to formulate good questions to your opponent. That's also a very key point of this game, and where a lot of people fall short. It's having good dialogue with your opponent, where it's an open information game. So I would hope that all of your opponents, if you ask a good formulated question, they're going to give you the knowledge that you want, and the information you're asking for. And do that before you commit to an action. You say, okay, what is your threat range? And you're just trying to factor in, do you have any threat extenders? Is there any way of making that faster? What is your damage output? You're asking those good questions that aren't really necessarily open-ended, but just getting the information before you commit to movements makes it not only a clean game on both sides, but just it helps to not have those like negative play experiences where like those gotchas and things like that, where those feel bad moments are like, oh, if I would have asked, maybe this wouldn't have happened to me. So that's a great thing that I always, like I employ with pretty much any game I play, is you have that dialogue with your opponent, so you're all on the same page. There's no gray area. Everything is right up front, and not only will it be a more enjoyable game to play, those are the games that people will be talking about. They're like, oh yeah, this guy had a great experience, super clean, no issues. So that's something that I would definitely recommend too, is trying to get that early game kind of dialogue, saying, all right, if this dice goes out of this dice tray, I'm always going to re-roll it. set your expectations with your opponent before the game starts, and then make sure that, very important, you stick to those expectations and do not deviate obviously from them. Even if you're low on clock or something like that, you can't just start changing the way you play just because obviously that the situation is different. You need to try to be as consistent as you possibly can be, and the game is going to be that much more enjoyable to play on both ends.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Our next question comes from Tyrants. So, Steamroller 24, besides going second, what are 3 list design principles you have to give yourself the best shot at success for the Steamroller packet, particularly at 100 points?
Okay. So one having really good diversity of models, where you have at least 2 to 3 cohort models, at least probably 4 to 5 solos, and at least I would say 3 to 4 units, where you want to have a good diversity of models to score a variety of pieces of terrain, because you obviously don't know what scenarios you're going to be playing. So that's having a well-balanced list as far as construction-wise, where you want to have options everywhere to score. So and kind of what Tyrant said earlier too, the redundancies of that. So if you lose obviously that unit, or if you do lose a warjack after you score, you have another one to get in there, so you're not losing that race for points. Is a big one. Also, we kind of talked about it a little bit earlier too, having models in your list that are having with terrain in mind, right? Because terrain now is more dense than ever has been before. Where you got that 12 to 14 pieces of terrain in every table, so you have to have a plan in order to work your army through terrain. So you're going to need models with flight, with ghostly, just ways of interacting, or just being terrain agnostic, where you don't have to worry about your terrain placement to get where you need to get to. Because if you're playing, these armies that are speed 4, speed 5, or even speed 6 armies that you don't have the ability to move effectively through the scenario, it's going to be really hard for you to dig into your opponent's side of the table to even contest, let alone score your opponent's objectives on their side of the table. So, and you're going to be significantly behind in that area on the points race. So having models that can do that, I would, and also if you don't have the speed 6 or so model, or you don't have those fast elements, you definitely need to look into high quality guns, some way of keeping your opponent honest so they're not able to bully you with their speed. So yeah, having good range modules or spell modules to keep your opponent honest on that behalf, so they're not going to be able to be overly aggressive on your side of the table, and or you're able to just scalpel out that solo that's on the back of a flag, or take out 2 or 3 of the models of a unit, so now that unit can't score that objective piece of terrain. So you're looking at just ways that you can also interact with your opponent's models without having to actually commit units to them, because this packet is very much so a fundamentals type of Warmachine now, where it's not so much like the shock and awe, like all out attrition play of like, I'm going to try to score 5 scenario points in one turn and just win the game. This is more so now of, I'm going to try to hang in the game, score 2 to 3 points a turn, and then just make good quality, smart attrition plays, not expose any key elements of my army, but just, it's a much slower style game than it was in Mark III. where most of the crucial turns happen now on turns like 3 and 4, opposed to almost every turn. The crucial turns were always like 2 and 3, where the most models were eliminated at that point. So the game, I think, has slowed down a little bit as far as that goes, because usually the person who overextends first into the other person just loses so much attrition wise that it's almost not worth it in some occasions to actually go over and contest your opponent's models. Where if you can just score, your side of the table, your 2 to 3 points on your side of the table, and just equalize out the points, where, okay, if you score 2, I score 3, that's fine if you're not giving your opponent anything in return. And then they now have to decide if they're going to come over and contest and try to remove models. And by doing so, you're still not giving them anything of real value. So you're still coming out ahead of that attrition trade. And even if they stop you from scoring that 1 to 2 points and you score 1 and they score 2 back, you're still basically even Steven. You're down by 1 control point. You're in no rush of losing the game there. So you're just playing basically good fundamentals as far as the attrition style of the game now. I think it's where it is very key to be successful in the Steamroller for 2024.
I love that, actually. So if I could, I guess, offer a little bit of something that's helped me a lot. And I talked to Andy about it and some of my other friends who play. When I look at the battlefield now, because it's so wide with this new scenario packet, what I like to do when I'm especially in a 100-point game where I have multiple units, solos, warjacks, etc., is I almost like to split my force up into little squads and teams. So a lot of the times I have a lot of models that really synergize well together, deploy together, and advance up the board. So it's kind of helped me break down the battlefield where it doesn't feel so overwhelming, and it's kind of helped me tap more into the fundamentals and lean into model strengths and synergies without it like breaking my brain too much, where I find myself in the tank. Because typically when I go into list construction, I don't try and build my list reactively, like, oh, how am I going to deal with like A, B, and C? I like to make a list that has a job or a purpose and create models, put models together or rack spells that help accomplish said tasks, with of course, you want to have some tools to deal with things like, tough or armor cracking or like dude spam, whatever that might be. But that's really helped me approach this new scenario packet and, transition from like what Mark III was when we had like the giant zones. It's just something that's helped me.
Yeah, no, that's also a good point too. Is the way that the scenarios are set up now, where you don't have the giant rectangles, the giant circles. I mean, the controlling and contesting zones are much smaller, more spread out. So you want to have those types of modules and things to be independent, like I said, and being able to, and kind of what Tyrants said earlier, being able to play board edge to board edge, because even in some scenarios, those zones are going to shift, they're going to move, your opponent can move them. So you really need to be as versatile and mobile as possible. Or even if you do need to play a brick list or you want to play a brick list, what you can do too is even just move everything to the center, where if you're playing like say a wolves at your heels or a battle lines, you can shift all of the objectives towards the middle of the table and just basically bunker up there with everything, where it's a high risk, high reward strategy, but it can be done where if all the zones are basically within 6 to 8 inches of each other, you can score everything. But you also, if you ever lose that center module, basically the game's over. But if your army is more of a brick, then you want to try to, over the course of turns, push all the objectives into each other to kind of make it so you don't have to spread, which can help you out a little bit there too. But it is a different thought process between the old Steamroller packet and this one, just partially also because you've got theoretically half the models access to the unit you would normally have, because obviously units got cut in half. So some of those abilities that were extremely powerful, like Vengeance and things like that, aren't nearly as impactful as they would normally be. But you also have to just be aware that you're only going to, unit basically generates a max of 5 to 6 attacks, typically, depending on your weapons or the unit. That you have to be aware of where the placement is much more impactful in this now, because you've got less models to work with and a very much smaller area of margin for error as far as you're contesting models within zones, within your terrain pieces. So each loss you incur is magnified that much more than it would be in Mark III, because you've got less models to operate with.
Okay, so moving on to our next question. So this one's a three-parter and comes from Paul. So how do you dojo the conceptual list to see what it's capable of, and how many data points are necessary before you start to swap out the models? So to break this down, Paul asked, do you play the same army or type of army a few times, or do you test the list's effects on infantry spam, and once you get that, do you move on to another type of army? Or lastly, how do you know if the list doesn't work or if you just played it incorrectly? What patterns or evidence would need to be present to figure that out?
Okay, that's all right. So I guess we'll start off with let's see, conceptualizing the list. Okay, so typically for me, and it helps a lot too now that we're I'll plug Tyrants, we're our North American league and whatnot. It helps tremendously right now with our War Table League, where you can play put in 2 lists, you get 3 games, and you can you get to reload obviously the next month and do something different, where that is hugely beneficial for just like trying stuff out and playing games. And I've done a lot of that too, where I'll play a list, play 3 games with that or the course of the month, and just kind of keep track of the kind of the models themselves. Like, okay, well, how many models has this model been able to kill? Like, what is the functionality of each of the models in my list? So is this model performing where I expected it to? Is it overperforming where I expected it to? Is it underperforming where I expected it to? So usually for me, it's like 3 to 5 games of playing the exact same list, exact same configuration, to get a good just kind of flow to see how this is running. Or I want to play it 5 times just to make sure that I have all the models correct, all the interactions are correct, and I'm not missing anything. And if I'm still running into problems at that point, then I start digging deeper as far as how is my list failing? Is it not have enough attacks to basically in the mid to end game to close out a game? Am I being bullied in the early game as far as do I not have the speed or the ranged attacks to keep my opponent from basically getting to dictate the pace of the game to me? So by looking into where the list is failing, you then start changing modules of the list to kind of fit those needs. And typically, I would only change a max of I would say 25 points of the army at any given time. You don't want to change more than that, because by doing that, you're basically just redoing a whole new list anyways. And all the interactions, there's too many new factors for it actually to potentially function the way you're looking at. So change it 25 points or less at a time. Just to get a good baseline of what you're doing, what the functionality of the list is, and go from there. Because obviously, like anything, the more you practice, the more you play, the better off you're going to be, regardless of what you're doing. And in retrospect of like playing the list and knowing if I played it incorrectly or if the list is just bad, typically you'll be able to notice it a little bit is if like your interactions are clunky, where you have models that are tripping over each other, whether it be like your placement of like I have to work my way around my own models to get places, or if you could just have you're being unfamiliar with your opponent's list and your target priority is incorrect, and that could lose you a game as well. So that's why usually playing at least 5 games and try to get, I would say, at least if you're playing into a list that you have been beaten by badly, do some research into that list, because it could have been that your own inexperience caused you obviously to horribly misplay that matchup and just lose that game, where maybe you do have the correct tools to play into that, but you don't know at that point what those tools are. So try to get at least 1 to 2 games and even into that matchup again, and see if you maybe next time you're less aggressive, or you can be more aggressive, or just try a different strategy and see if that changes the scope of the game. And if not, if the game basically runs the same course as it kind of did the previous time, then you know that you have a list design problem and not so much a play error issue. But those, like I said, you'll work that out as you play the list more, where as you get more familiar with your models and interactions, you'll be able to figure out pretty quickly, is it me not knowing my own models or me not knowing my opponent's models that's causing the issue, or is it just that my list is not up to par, and then you can start changing it and doing iterations from there.
Okay, and then thank you for that. Our last question that was submitted comes from Mox. And Mox asks, I'm struggling to understand how I should be playing in Steamroller 24. I felt like I had a good hand on the previous Steamroller, but the combinations of moving objectives, maps being more dense with terrain, objectives feeling farther apart, and scoring timing has left me struggling with how to win outside of just waiting for my opponent to accidentally get assassinated. What tips do you have to better understand how the new game is meant to be played in the Steamroller 24 world we live in now?
Okay. So like we kind of talked about a little bit before, the fundamentals of the game are very important. So having good quality fundamentals as far as being able to attrition, piece trade effectively, try to stay out of threat ranges while also taking pieces from your opponent, and just being able to play board edge to board edge. You want to try to play casters that have that 14-inch control area that you can, obviously your feet can be almost table wide if your caster's centrally located. Also having again, models that are able to move through terrain well, and also models that can do their job without much, being self-sufficient. Basically, helps out quite a bit as well. Also, very big in 2024 scenarios is getting defensive feats and whatnot. Having defensive feats right now are incredibly powerful. Whether that be able to go second, being able to score first, which again puts pressure on your opponent. And then if you can defensively feat and score that, those 2 to 3 points or even like 4 points, and then force your opponent to have to play on your own terms. Now they have to commit to you in order to either stop you from scoring again or scoring points themselves is huge. So looking for your casters in your army that do have more of that defensive mindset feat, because you want to try to find those models that can take and hold zones. And you don't need it to obviously to. In most cases, all you really need is just that one model to survive, just to stop your opponent from scoring that 1 point in a lot of situations. You're going to take losses. I mean, it's going to happen. I mean, this is obviously a very violent and aggressive atmosphere as far as Warmachine now as a especially in these new with new Mark IV armies. Again, like everything just basically eliminates anything that it really touches. There's very few things that survive combat. But if you can have, one unit or two models in a unit that survive and stop your opponent from scoring that point, it's hugely impactful. So trying to find those terrain pieces that are going to work well for you as well, that you can score and keep a model hidden, or getting that defensive terrain buff while also scoring or contesting, ways of just augmenting your stats as best you can to get that thing to get that one model to survive that turn. And because in a lot of cases, that's all you need is one of those models to control a zone and stick, and that usually gets enough momentum to carry you to even the next turn, puts a lot more pressure on your opponent, and then by doing that forces them to have to overcommit, just to not only score but also stop you from scoring, and then you really get to have a massive attrition play potential to remove a lot of models in their army, and then you can get up massively on not only attrition but just the board state and position, and you can still get to control the pace of the game with scoring. So yes, going second in this current scenario packet is incredibly powerful. If we haven't already picked that up, because obviously with not only the deployment zones favor the second player, most of them, a good portion of scenarios give extra objectives for the second player to score. And the way that the scenarios are set up now and the win conditions, where if you're ever up by 3 on your opponent's turn, you win the game. So being able to dictate the pace of the game by scoring first is huge. And then not only do you get to score first, you also potentially get to score last on turn 7 as well, which is incredibly powerful. So the only time that I would ever consider taking first is if you're playing against a very aggressive army that wants to aggressively position on you. So whether that be, like a Dusk Tyrants with that models that threat 15 to 17 inches, almost army wide, or a Khymaera style army that has a bunch of AD models that also are going to threat project basically in your deployment zone on turn 2 if you allow them to go first. So you have to typically race those kind of armies to the middle of the table. And because if you allow them to take that centralized position, you effectively are going to have to fight through their entire army in order to contest points, which puts you on the back foot. So you want to try to take that advantage away from your opponent and get to the center of the table and not allow them to get to that projection, so you at least can hold the objectives on your side of the table.
Great, awesome. Well, that does it for all of the questions that were sent before. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, does anybody else have any, like I said, thoughts or input on anything we talked about tonight? Like, I definitely would be interested to hear some of your perspectives. You guys have anything?
Yeah, I've got something. I have a working theory currently, being as we just discussed second player advantage in the packet, which is incredibly relevant. I have a general working theory that if you are given first and you are not a fast army, or even if you are, I believe that you are playing to not lose on scenario, and you should be actively looking to achieve victory either through one of the other non-scenario avenues, particularly assassination. I haven't validated it fully yet, but it's my working model theory.
Okay,
And
so you're saying, as far as, like, if you are forced to go first and you are not in one of those aggressive armies that we kind of talked about, that you're fundamentally just trying to play the game where you don't lose in scenario, but also like try to still aggressively posture to win on assassination potentially.
correct. I think your best. I think at that point, your best out is going to be to try to create an assassination vector, or to force time. Because generally, second player is going to own the scenario game. There's a couple of scenarios which second player advantage is not 100%. And I wouldn't say in any of the scenarios it's 100%, but I would say that some of them are exceedingly strong. And if you can't get in a spot where you can achieve an equilibrium without giving up a giant attritional play, that I think you're best off preserving your force and using it to try and scalp out the opposing caster.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that as an option. What has worked for myself too in the past, where if you are a slower army, because like I said, I've been playing Orgoth, and they are oddly enough kind of deemed a slower army now in the format, which is kind of funny. That they're speed 6 models that are still only 11 inches. Basically, threat range is almost nothing in this current state of the game. But if you are a slower army going first, typically what I've found success in is you overloading a side of the table. So you go for the larger, more dense objective side, and put the bulk of your army on that side of the table, and you push hard for that. And then you have basically a smaller token force on the other side of the table, which is the I'm always going to lose on this side eventually, but you just try to delay your opponent as long as you possibly can to try to win on the other flank. So, because typically most players are going to deploy kind of like Erica said, where they're symmetrical, where they have their modules. They try to, like, all right, I'm going to put these 3 models together with these 3 models on this side, this on this side, and make it this way. But if you can basically just win through sheer volume of attacks, and get to a side and clear a side, typically that's going to help you achieve that scenario play potentially as well, because you have to be much more aggressive as the first player than you would normally be. because you cannot allow the second player to just basically, like I said before, walk up, take the middle of the table, defensive feet, and then just sit there. Because if that happens, you are going to be in a very disadvantaged position. So you have to, and that definitely is out of the norm of some people's comfort zones, where that's not a play style that people are used to doing. But you do need to adopt a more aggressive stance if you are first player than you would normally do. And even if that means like running some of your models into first turn threat ranges of being shot at, that still is okay. Because typically, if your opponent's shooting at you, they're not running. So they're only walking up 3 to 4 inches, 5 inches, taking pot shots at you, and then not aggressively moving into the scenario, which allows you to then yourself, the next turn, take up that space. So you're forfeiting a few models to have your opponent, not allowing them to aggressively position against you.
To kind of piggyback off of that, the command card. So I've noticed that too against certain armies, like Signar, for example. I'm a huge fan of that duck and cover card, and that's been an amazing tool now, especially with the blast resistance, to help deliver that like first line of infantry.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely better. I think now the duck and cover card is much better now than, say, infiltration was, just because there's a lot of models now coming out, again, primarily in Signar, that ignore stealth. So like that, having that stealth model is not necessarily going to protect them from some of the premier gun lines in the game. So having that cover and blast resistance is a much more effective answer than the stealth command card. But I mean, obviously, you don't have the points for it. That's a different story. But I would say typically you're going to want to have at least one army or one of your lists with that in mindset of like, all right, if I get into one of these matchups that my opponent has a hyper aggressive list, and I have to answer that, I have to take away first turn from them. You want to have that mindset of how am I going to interact with that, with either guns or just bringing more bodies than they have bodies to beat them on the attrition front. So you're looking at things like that, where yes, like your command cards, even the extra shield guard might help here or there, depending on what army you're fighting against. So those are just great tools to try out, and ultimately it's going to come down to your personal play style, and even your own meta, because obviously it's different playing in your local stores opposed to playing at a out of state convention. So it really just comes down to what you're seeing a lot of, and trying to build your tech pieces and play your armies to kind of what you're seeing most prevalent. So anybody else have any anything you want to interject? Anything,
I have a question about the new army, the Khymaera. How is that playing right now? Is it what is the type of you would go? I know you mentioned it earlier, but what would you be doing in Khymaera, basically?
So I mean, Khymaera is as of right now, they are a very offensive army where they can't really brawl. Like most of their units and war beasts are fairly fragile, but what they lack in defense, they make up for in offense. So you have a lot of models that are very fast. They can hit very hard. They are very accurate. but you typically want to try to end the game as fast as possible with Khymaera, because they do not take hits well. So you are looking to either assassinate your opponent or try to, like I said before, overload a side of the table and have that devastating turn of like, all right, I'm going to wipe out everything on this side of the table. Now, how do you respond when you don't have a left flank anymore? So you're wanting to play that style of game where you are trying to play the threat range game where I threat farther than you do. So I'm going to always dictate the pace of the game as Khymaera, typically. And by doing so, making good trades and good target prioritization, which that will come with time as you play the army on what models are the most dangerous models to you. And typically those models are going to be the guns that, those guns that can see through your stealth, those guns that can, that are accurate to hit your defense 14 models. Those are the things you're typically going to want to prioritize removing in Khymaera, because they are very weak to being shot at. The Wyvern helps a little bit with that, but they don't really have shield guards to speak of. They've got very little in the way of ranged defense, and even somewhat magic defense, for that matter. So you are wanting to, as the Khymaera player, try to position it aggressively as you can without jumping into your opponent's threat ranges, because typically, as the Khymaera player, you are going to threat farther than your opponent. There are very few exceptions to that, but you are typically going to be the aggressor in almost every game you play. So it's just being able to know what your opponent's army does, or again, ask those questions of like, all right, what does this do? What is its damage output? What is its mat and rat? What are its guns? How do its guns work? So you want to try to pick out those models that are going to be most effective against you and eliminate those as fast as you can.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. Well, if we don't have any other questions, or anyone else that wants to chime in, I think that we can wrap this up. I hope that you, all of you listening, got some kind of takeaway from this, and it helped you out in some extent. And like I said, feel free to, at any point if you need to, message me. You can message me directly. If it's something that I can answer right away, I will do so. And if it's obviously a good question, we can bring it up in another topic and episode and do that as well. So by all means, if you have any questions down the road, feel free to message me. I'm always available. So I'll get back with you as fast as I can.
All right. Thank you so much, Akers. And don't forget to pick up your tickets for the Nova Open. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.